They started every time Black Lives Matter narrative starts running in the media, Black people die, Black people's neighborhoods get burned down. From the start of Trayvon Martin, moving on to Freddie Gray, and here we are today with George Floyd, with Ahmaud Arbery. This is what happens every single time. So if there was if there was that one time, there may have been other protests that were. I'm not condemning all protesters. I believe in protesting.
I'm pushing back against the every time narrative.
No. What I'm saying is every time their narrative, like when I say becomes mainstreamed, every time their narrative, every time you go, whoop, we're doing Black Lives Matter again, you can bet your ass all across the nation, Black neighborhoods are going to burn, Black people are going to lose their jobs, and Black people are going to lose their lives, right? So that's the hypocrisy. The idea that they care about all this other stuff, when in fact, every time they're protesting, it is specifically about police brutality, okay? And Black people suffer. So if your solution is worse than the problem, it's not a solution.
So
how many Black people have died in these George Floyd protests?
So that's
how many Black people have been arrested because of these George Floyd protests? How many Black people have been impoverished because of these George Floyd protests? That's when it's a good time to sit back and say, is what I'm doing working?
Okay, so let's look at that. So I think it's an interesting way to frame this. Black Lives Matter protests happen every day, and they've happened since 2014. Your point is that the media when it becomes the national narrative becomes, this is a BLM moment. Shit is on fire. What I'm asking you to consider is that part of what happens is when shit is on fire, they throw BLM onto it, right? That they don't account for all these other. I mean, I go to BLM protests all the time where people are marching, and we're not just marching against police violence. Again, that's just the sexy story. Cable news doesn't actually care about Black food insecurity or trans. I mean, one of the most vulnerable populations are Black trans women in terms of being subject to death. Again,
but that's because the majority of what's the reason that they have a higher death rate?
I mean, there are a few reasons. There are structural factors, but we can talk about that too. But my point is, we don't cover it. So part of it is that part of it is not that Black people don't care about this stuff. It's what's sexy to corporate media. Sexy to corporate media is Black people burning shit down.
Right.
So
that's fair. I will totally give you that. That is usually when it's the media.
One for us, guys.
No, I mean, look, I have said that 90% of our problem is the media, but at that point though, if your movement is being hijacked and that's how it's being portrayed, how do you combat that?
Well, I think you have to decide if you care what the dominant media narrative is, and also what political work does that media narrative do? Because I don't also want to pretend that the rebellions that we've been seeing around the country aren't significant and aren't valuable. I just don't think they can be the only game in town, right? If you
think the rebellions are good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
These autonomous cities, the burning and looting of Black community and of the black communities' homes and burning down of the neighborhoods, these Black people that are crying on screen saying that their neighborhoods are being destroyed, you see that as a good?
No, what I'm saying is that I see a movement of uprisings around the country as good. Now, we can discuss tactically whether each specific act is wise.
Tell me how it's good. Let's take Minneapolis, the first one, when they burned down the city. Tell me how you looked at that and said, this is good.
So one thing is that, again, Black death is so ordinary in this country, right?
Yeah, because we do it the whole time to ourselves.
And Black death is so ordinary in this country, regardless of how we can analyze why in a moment, but getting the nation to stop and pay attention often requires the spectacle of violence, right? I'm not talking about killing people. I'm not talking about doing harm to people. I'm talking about even like tearing up a store, right? If you look at Martin Luther King, just as one example, right? Martin Luther King leveraged the spectacle of violence to get America to pay attention. The only difference is Martin King said, we're going to strategize so that we get beat, right? We're not going to tear other people up, but we're getting beat, right? I mean, the Pettus Bridge was the idea of being on the Pettus Bridge was, that if we protest here, that that these police will come and harm us, and that America
really
will see how
brilliant strategy
brutal.
because it showed America that the problem was the police. Do you think the spectacle right now is showing America that the problem is the police?
Yes!
The problem is no, it's not. When you look at these riots, it is not. This is the exact opposite of Martin Luther King's strategy. The exact opposite. Martin Luther King said, "We're going to go in and be peaceful, and we're going to watch them send dogs on us. They're going to set their fire hose on us, and when the whole world sees these clips, they're going to realize that the problem is are white people that are racist and the governments that are allowing this terror to go on." Okay, win. He crushed that. It was a brilliant strategy. Right now, Black America's strategy is we're going to go in and be violent. We're going to go in and loot. We're going to go in and take the TVs, and then America's going to think, Black Lives Matter is a terrorist unit, and that's exactly what the concept is. It is.
But I guess what I'm pushing back against is
we don't look good. This is not making Black people look good.
The first thing I'd push back against is this idea that the only time we can engage in the type of resistance is if our bodies are the ransom for justice.
I'm just telling you it's not Martin Luther King's strategy.
No, I'm with you. I am agreeing that it's not. I'm saying it's not the same tactic. The overall strategy is still to use violence and the spectacle of
we're gonna
violence
look back
to get justice. Right. But you're like, and what I'm hearing you say is that's cool if the dogs are biting us and the hoses are spraying us.
I'm saying the message you're going to deliver is that black people are violent. So using the idea, and you have just already said that you thought Martin Luther King had a good strategy, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
What we are doing is the exact opposite of that strategy. So we are showing that black people are violent, that black people loot, that black people rob, that black people kill one another. That is what is being shown. How you think we're winning with that narrative, I don't know. I don't know who right now is thinking, I'm so glad we took those TVs out of Target and burned down Target because now people
that's
seeing.
That's such a small part of what happened. The other thing is, even
what was the spectacle that was shown?
No, I'll tell you. But when we talk about King, right? Because there's King in marching in '65, but there's also what's happening in Watts in '65, what's happening in Detroit in '67. There are the same rebellions you're talking about are happening around King.
And what happened? What was the conclusion of that?
Hear my thought out though. My point is that it's never a single strategy, right? There's always multiple things happening, right? There are people calling for defunding right now, and there are people on the streets. Just like King, there are people who are marching and getting beaten by police, and there are people who are tearing up Detroit and Watts. I'm saying we need multiple strategies. Now, I agree with you. I would love if, and I got to say, I have a bookstore in Philadelphia, and a whole bunch of stores on my block got smashed. Sneaker store got raided. What else got raided? Another a hair store got raided. My bookstore did not, right? My coffee shop did not. Now, why? Well, it's not nearly as random as you might think, right? Much of a lot of the stuff is, you're tearing down your own shit. Most of this shit in our neighborhood isn't ours. Right? Most of it are people who are occupying our neighborhoods. Most of the stuff we're taking, most of these homes that are burning, we don't own. So
Target, where they hire majority black people, so you've taken black people's jobs in that situation. I mean, I'm trying to see one positive thing in burning down and looting and robbing. And I want to go back because you brought up the mid '60s protests. And the riots, rather, because they weren't protests. They're the notorious Detroit and Chicago riots that took place. They were rebellions, riots, same thing.
Which are forms of protest.
Okay, sure. What was the end consequence of that?
The Voting Rights Act of
that happened before that. 64. The riots happened in '67 and '68.
You're talking about those riots?
Yeah,
you're talking about different. Okay, so King dies in '68. And we get more civil rights legislation months later.
No.
And this is in the aftermath of rebellions.
But what was this is the thing, is people, you're looking for a piece of legislation, but what happened? Detroit and Chicago were the economic booms for the black community. The riots happened, the rich people got up and they left, and they depressed those cities for decades to come. Okay, so the thing is that this is the problem. Everybody wants to be in the now, I'm in the later, okay? I'm already hearing the conversations amongst business owners. They're leaving. They're going to leave the cities. So you want to talk about signing up for another 60 years of black poverty? It's exactly what we did. We signed up for black poverty, and it started in the 1960s. First and foremost, it was a legislation that was supposed to be helpful. Nope, that led to economic depression too, because it incentivized bad behavior. All of the Great Society Act and all of that stuff that happened in the mid-'60s was not good for black America. Sounded good, like everything the Democrats put forward. Sounded great, we're going to give you stuff, but really it incentivized father absence. It welfareized the black community, and it married us to the government. On top of that, we burned and looted our own communities, thinking that we were going to get justice. And in what really happened is the business leaders left, the jobs left. Black people had no jobs, and we were poor. And we have now had 60 years complaining about the condition of Chicago and Detroit and these inner cities, and we're recreating the wheel all over again right now.
I think that's a heck of a analysis.
It's the truth.
No, I think it's not.
But it is. That's what happened in the '60s.
Again, it's sort of like the King example. It's not that I disagree with the particular things you're saying happen. I'm saying there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happened at the same time, which complicates the story.
This is not King's Black America.
I know. No, I'm saying in the same respect. So, for example, when we look at and I actually talk about this in my book, Nobody, which you all should read.
Oh, right. Yep. Forgot to do that. Yes.
I don't want to plug it, but it's actually relevant to the topic.
It's, Casualties of America's War on the Vulnerable, from Ferguson to Flint and beyond.
Because part of what I talk about in Ferguson is this very thing, right? You're right. There are migrations. There's white flight. Then ultimately you end up with the suburbanization of poverty in Ferguson, because Ferguson's a suburb, right? Then you look at a place like Chicago. You look at a place like Detroit. Multiple things are happening. It's not just that black people rioted and lost the city and doomed themselves to poverty for 60 years. You have to look at the shift in the economy itself. You have to look at the flight of factors, which weren't a response to black rebellion. It was a response to tax incentives. It was a response to going.
It was rebellions. It was the automobile companies that were making those cities flourish, and they all packed up and left.
Not because of everybody. Again, a good example is Ferguson.
They stated it when they left.
Yeah, companies say a lot of things. That doesn't mean that's why they left.
They were burning down their factories.
No,